One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Today's conversation was a real treat, and I already cannot wait for you to tell me how much you really enjoyed my chat with Craig. So Craig Van Slyke is someone that I met for the first time at Podcast Movement in August earlier this year. And he came up to me and said, I've been a huge fan of your YouTube videos. And I thought that this was such a cool opportunity to get to meet you. And I just wanted to say hi. And we kind of talk about it in our chat. He was like, oh, I hope that I didn't just creep her out. I hope that this wasn't something where she was like, wait, was that too much? I was so grateful that Craig came to me and told me what pieces of content were working for him and his podcast. And I just said, you know what? I would love to hear how your podcasting journey has unfolded and all the amazing thing that you've done with your show. And as of this episode airing, he actually has more than one podcast, which we're going to get into all of it. But let me tell you a little bit about Craig. So Craig is actually a college professor. He has been a business school dean. He has taught information systems in the business school. And he is a wannabe rancher as well as a podcaster. And I'm so excited. I'm just so excited. It was such a fun conversation. So enjoy my chat with Craig Van Slyke. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right, Profit Podcast listeners, I'm so excited for today's guest because we had the opportunity to meet in person in August at Podcast Movement. So it's so good to see your face again, Craig, and I'm happy that you're here today.
And she didn't tell the backstory of that. We were at a Buzzsprout meetup, and I was talking to a gentleman who ran his wife's podcast, had a small business, and I started pointing to Crystal and talking to this guy. And I saw the sideways look like, why is this dude I don't even know pointing at me? So I had to come up and say, I'm not a creep or anything like that. Just I was talking to this guy that, oh, she's the one you should be talking to. So, but it was a great opportunity. We actually met, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, we ended up having a great conversation. We talked about, you have multiple podcasts, and even since then, you've started another podcast. So I
Right.
am just so excited to ask you all the questions. But Craig, I want to start just from the very top because I know that you're a professor, you've been a dean, like you have a lot of experience in higher education. So when did podcasting kind of come into your stratosphere? Have you always been a podcast listener and then you said, "Hey, I want to start a podcast"?
Well, kind of. So I've enjoyed talk radio forever. I mean, as long as I can remember. My dad was into talk radio, so I kind of inherited that. And as talk radio started to wane and it got harder to find decent shows, I discovered podcasting. I even went so far. I'm not sure these were podcasts, but I bought an internet radio. This was before everybody had tablets and things and phones that you could listen on. Had a radio that was a dedicated internet device that I could listen to streaming all over the world. And so it was great. And so I've been a podcast listener for, I don't know, a decade or more. And then I've been told on more than one occasion that I have a face for audio. So, I started thinking about, it would be fun to do a podcast. And so I talked to my friend, Andrea Christelle, who's a philosopher, kind of picture the polar opposite of me in almost every way. And that's Andrea. And so we were talking and I said, hey, do you want to start a podcast? And she, in a moment of lack of clarity, said, sure, let's start one. And so we did. We started the Rational Ignorance podcast, and we've had a lot of fun with it. We've learned a lot, and made our share of mistakes along the way. But you were a huge help. I listened to all of your episodes and read your book and that kind of thing. And so we just decided to jump in and get started.
I love hearing the backstory. And so thank you so much for just being a part of our community and, listening to content and reading the book. Like I just love that feedback. It's so helpful. But I want to know more about the relationship that you and Andrea have. Like, is this a colleague? Is this someone that you are like, okay, we're kind of in the same, well, you said that y'all are like polar opposites. So,
Right.
because people ask me all the time, they're like, I want to do this, but I don't want to do it by myself. And I don't know where to find a co-host. That seems like an impossible journey. So how did that kind of unfold for the two of you?
Well, so Andrea and I were coworkers. We were both at Northern Arizona University. I was the dean of the business school, and she ran a program called Philosophy in the Public Interest. So she's a PhD philosopher, a practical philosopher, which I know seems kind of oxymoronic, but she is a practical philosopher. And she approached me and wanted to see if she could somehow get business students engaged in some of her programs. And so we set that up, and the kids loved it. They got a lot out of it. We could turn out the students if we needed to, give a little extra credit, require something, boom, students are there. And they added a really nice contrast to the students who would normally attend that sort of thing. And so we just became friends. She ended up working for me in the business school for a while, and then we both left the university, but have stayed in touch. But we always had great conversations. She taught me a lot about kind of ancient Greek philosophy, Aristotle, the Stoics, and a lot of things that, I'd never really thought about before. And they kind of rounded me out. And I would help her see some of the practical applications of things and, push back from time to time. And we even taught a freshman seminar together, which was really interesting, a business dean and a philosophy professor. And so, we just had these great conversations. And like a lot of podcasts start out, it's, hey, we like our conversations. So, of course, everybody else in the world will too. And hopefully at least a few do actually enjoy our conversations. But we've taken it from there.
That's awesome. And where does the term rational ignorance come from? Because I love it so much. And I remember telling you that. I was like, wait, what is the name of your show again? And you told me, and I was like, I love this so, so much. So where did that come from?
So it's actually from a book on political economics back in 1957. which is before I was even born. And you can tell I was born a long time ago. But this guy, Anthony Downs, basically said, there's a reason that people don't vote. And it turns out that if you think about things in a certain way, your vote doesn't make any difference, any real difference. And so you shouldn't spend a lot of energy or time trying to seek out information about who you should vote for. Now, there are a lot of other reasons to vote and to seek out information. So he wasn't saying you shouldn't vote, but he was just laying out this case that, it kind of makes sense that people just vote a straight party ticket or go with whoever the newspaper recommends or whatever, because it really doesn't matter that much. That one vote at the margin doesn't matter. And you shouldn't spend resources trying to find information unless you can gain some kind of a benefit from that information. So that's where the rational part comes in. The rational means the gain that you get should exceed the costs if you're going to do something. And the ignorance comes in that sometimes that equation comes out that you should stay ignorant. And so Andrea actually introduced me to the term, and I thought, oh, that's got to be the name of the podcast, because that's just so surprising. It's just one of those phrases that's like, what?
Yeah. Like, what?
So,
hang on. What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure we're very good at this because we're two academics, but we tried to really get to the heart of something and not have a lot of, superfluous noise. But as I said, well, I'm not so sure we're really good at that yet, but well, what are you going to do?
Well, I was checking out y'all's podcast before, our conversation, and I was like, man, this is really cool that y'all have this, just overwhelming amount of really smart people at your fingertips, because it's what y'all do. I mean, you are able to collaborate with other educators and, like you said, PhDs. So there's a lot of really smart people that I would imagine that you have access to say, hey, you want to just have a conversation? Do you want to have a chat? Is that kind of how y'all envisioned it, or is there a bigger goal behind the podcast?
Well, so there is a kind of an emerging bigger goal, but we started out with targets of opportunity. We knew people, like you said, we knew people, and we knew people that knew cool things and were really smart. And so we said, well, let's start with who we know. Dr. Robert Gale is one of the other faculty here at Louisiana Tech University, and he's an expert on social media and fake news and a lot of things like that. And so, we engaged him, we engaged other faculty members that we knew or knew people who knew, but they were really kind of, oh, we know this cool person, let's talk about what they know about. Now we're trying to be a little bit more focused around the idea of human flourishing. So what does it mean to live a really excellent life? And how can we help people do that? So we're trying to narrow a little bit. We were probably too broad. Now we're trying to bring it in a little bit. But I think that's part of the journey. I suspect a lot of podcasters do that.
I love this so much and I'm glad that you hit on it, because this is something that people come to me as a brand new podcaster. They're too scared that they're either super narrow or way too broad. And the honest answer is, and what it's kind of like the tough love from your coaching, my coaching perspective is, sometimes you just got to figure it out. Sometimes you just getting started, you'll gain so much clarity in how you like to create content, or you'll find this subset of your audience that you're just like, oh my gosh, I never knew that I could really serve these people in this way. So who is kind of your typical audience? Or did you create this to, just be an extra resource for your students and other people? Or you're just like, we just wanted to have fun conversations, we didn't really know what we were doing?
Well, we kind of had an audience in mind. We did really get in the fun conversation part, but we've given some thought to who the audience is. And this is going to sound so crazy, but they're people that think deep thoughts.
Yeah.
Like our latest episode is on a listener question about whether or not a hermit can flourish. Who thinks about that kind of stuff? Well, we do. Yeah. And there probably aren't a lot of people like us, but there are some people like us, at least one, the listener that posed the question. And so, but that to the right audience? That's a really interesting question. Our next episode is about hashtag Catterday. I don't know if did you know that's a thing on Twitter?
No, I'm like, please elaborate on that,
You,
please.
I know you have at least one cat. So you post pictures of your cats
On Saturday.
on Saturday. And so it's
That's
Catterday. It's a
Catterday.
thing. And I mean, somehow my Twitter feed is like 80% cat pictures now, but that's okay. But it's just
I
fun.
love it.
It's just fun. We've got this grind mentality that I think has gotten even worse during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
You just always have to be productive. You have to be doing something and it's going towards some goal. And I just don't think that's right. You just need to chill out sometimes. And whatever it is that helps you chill out, if it's, going for a walk in the park, if it's zoning out to some movie, if it's playing with your kids, if it's looking at, hashtag Catterday pictures, that kind of idea of putting your mind in neutral for a while is really beneficial in the long run. Just like, I think you're a runner, aren't you? Are you a runner?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a runner. I used to be a runner. But, if you run 7 days a week, it's going to get you after a while.
Right.
So you take a break. And so why don't we do that with our mental energy and the energy we put into our projects? So, but anyway, we can take this is our talent. We can take a simple thing like Catterday, and man, we can go on and on and on about it. And, look at it from what would Aristotle say about this? What the Chinese philosophers say about this? But like I said, some people think about those kinds of things, and that's who we're trying to target.
Yeah, this is so interesting because I this is what I actually love about podcasting, and some of the specific podcasts that I listen to as a consumer of shows, they play very different roles in my listening habits. Some of them are pure entertainment, some of them are education, right? I will hear them and think, okay, I'm going to learn something. Like I'm going to be ready to jot down some notes in my phone, or if I have to stop on my run, like there's just certain podcasts that I approach in different ways, and I would imagine that someone that listens to y'all's show, it would be kind of like, ooh, like what's coming this next week, right? Because I mean, this is what I love about the medium is you don't have to have rules of, well, we can only do this and talk about these specific things. You're interviewing PhDs, and then the next week you're talking about hermits and them flourishing. Right. I think that that's a beautiful way to describe the medium of doing what you want and kind of just having fun with it. And I love that you brought up everything in the pandemic was just such a hard right from what everybody was used to. And you are right. Not everybody knows how to relax or just chillax and just find something for enjoyment. So I love that y'all are exploring the different ways that, you can do that with the podcast.
And just in case my wife listens to this, I realize the hypocritical nature of me talking about not relaxing, being a fault, because I'm kind of a border collie, it's go or don't go.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So,
you're in good company.
That's right. I want to recognize that I know I'm a hypocrite there, but
it's okay. It's good. We could talk theoretical, right? Like we can talk about it in theory.
I'll stroke my beard in theory. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually want to go back to kind of what we were touching on earlier, because I was listening to a podcast like earlier today before we started recording. And I'm not sure if you're familiar. Do you know who Gary Vaynerchuk is? Gary V.
I do. Yep.
So he was on a podcast, and he has been someone who is, very hit or miss on the higher education and the education system and what it's going to look like, because he is someone that's, build your own business. You got to do this, you got to do that. And he said you could learn more from a podcast than you can sitting on a Zoom call or sitting in a lecture hall. And as someone, I've gone to college, my husband has gone and he's gotten his MBA. I see the value in higher education, but I do also see this ginormous shift in how people just behave. And I would just love your thoughts as someone who's been in like both sides of the coin, right? You're a podcaster and you've been an educator. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I would disagree a little bit, because it's a false choice. I mean, you don't have to go to college or gain education through podcasting. You can do both.
Oh, that's good.
So you don't have to choose. And it's an interesting question that you pose, because could somebody get everything they need through self-learning and experience, and absolutely they could.
Mm-hmm.
But who's got the drive to do that? I mean, I've had students say, well, Bill Gates doesn't have a college degree. And I said, well, if you think you're Bill Gates, go for it. I mean, I knew I wasn't Bill Gates, so I'm going to go to college and there are a lot of things that we could do differently in higher ed. I mean, there are a lot of problems with higher ed, and anybody that claims there aren't is just, burying their head in the sand. But still, I think the general public has a little bit of a skewed view of what goes on at universities because, the kids that are super woke that, protest this speaker or that speaker or, have a protest because of some silly policy the university puts out. That happens, but that's such a tiny fraction of the students. The faculty, I mean, there are some faculty that try to indoctrinate students, but it's so small that it's almost zero at a
Yeah.
practical level. I would bet that if you went back and asked my students over the years what my politics are, they'd have no idea.
Yeah.
And most of my colleagues are like that. We might bring up something that's going on in politics that relates to our class. We teach business, so if there's a change in the tax code, it matters, or if the government's going to start investing in sustainable energy, well, that matters from a business perspective. But we don't say, stupid party X or stupid party Y. We just lay it out as kind of a factual thing. And I think that's outside of a small number of programs, that's what colleges do. And college is expensive. That's a problem. We've struggled with the pandemic, but so has everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I could think of a lot of things I'd like to see change, but I don't see this big shift to self-learning and everybody doing it on their own. I mean, it's easier now, but you could have done that with libraries 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And not many people do it. So
no, that's a really good point. Well, I want you, while we're on this topic, to talk about a resource that you recently created. This is your third podcast to kind of help facilitate your students. Cause I thought it's such a great idea to, like you said, blend the two worlds together of, taking courses and also some self-learning. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, so I teach a required junior level class in information systems. So, you have those core classes that everybody in the college has to take. And I'm sure you remember your classes like that. So don't you have an accounting degree? Is that right?
No, I have a marketing. So it's
marketing degree.
Yeah. So it's business administration, marketing. Yep.
Okay. So, you had to take classes that you hated. Maybe it was accounting. I don't know. But, you had to take classes that you had to take. And it's even worse. Mine is at 8:00. So how students love 8:00 classes. Well, the kids, I'm going to sound old now, but the kids today don't like to read. It doesn't really matter what class. They're just not, most of them aren't going to dig into the book the way that prior generations did. But there's information they need to know in the book. And so I thought, well, how else can we get this information to them? Well, I have all the equipment, know how to do podcasting and that kind of thing. So I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create 10-minute overviews of every chapter that we cover and put them out as a podcast. So you can go out to any of the major podcast platforms and look up IS for business and put in Van Slyke and it'll pop up. And I told the students, look, it's out there. You can use it if you want to. You don't have to use it. It's not a requirement. But you're walking to class or you're driving to class, just listen to the podcast on your way to class. So if we're going to cover chapter 7, listen to the chapter 7 podcast. And when you walk to class, it'll help you, I guarantee. And it was exactly as you would predict. Right before the midterm, big spike in listens. But I think in some respects, it's part of a larger movement maybe that I think could affect higher education. We live in an on-demand world now. So when I was a kid, you listened to whatever music the DJ wanted to put on the radio. If you wanted to go out and buy an album, it was song number 1 and then song number 2, and some producer decided that's the order it was going to be in. And these are the songs that we're going to put on this album. And, you made sure you got home by 7 o'clock if you wanted to watch Chips or whatever it was back then. It's not like that anymore. You know, you listen to music you want to listen to. You don't have to be at the radio when your favorite talk show is on. It's a podcast now. You listen when you want. And so I think higher ed needs to tap into that more. And we haven't done a very good job of that at all. We're working on the same basic model that was developed God knows how many years ago. You go to school from sometime in August or September until sometime in May. Maybe you take the summer off and then it starts all over again. And you take 4 classes at a time and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not the way the world works anymore. And podcasting is a perfect example of that. You listen to what you want, when you want, how you want. And I think my little podcast is a small, small way of telling them, you can listen to, and you're required to listen to me drone on, at 8 o'clock in the morning. But if you want to, you can sit down and read. If you don't want to, you can listen to the podcast, and at least you'll get the high points. And so, I don't know, it's a tiny little thing. I think it helps them. We'll find out at the end of the term, but it also, this is a little bit out there, but I think it's also a signaling device because I don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it requires effort on my part, and they know that. I mean, I don't complain about the effort it requires, but they're smart kids. They know it requires some extra effort on my part, and I'm an eminent scholar, so I have I'm lucky enough to have the highest level position you can have in a college, and so nobody's making me do any of this kind of stuff. That sounded braggy. I didn't mean it to sound braggy. It was just for context. It's I asked my wife to get me a cardinal hat, like a Pope hat, so I could wear around the house, and she refuses to get it.
She said, no, not going to happen.
She will not call me your eminence. I don't know what I'm going to do about it.
Oh my God.
But anyway, I mean, it is a signaling devices. I actually care about whether or not you learn this stuff because I'm willing to go beyond what I really have to do and beyond what anybody would expect me to do. And so I'm not sure they get that, but I suspect that some of it kind of implicitly get it at least.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking back to my own college experience and thinking to me, it's the equivalent, but way better because it's way easier to listen to is, teachers would start sending out PowerPoints, oh, here's the slides from our lecture. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to know. So I could pay attention, but then also if they said something that was too fast and I didn't have time to wait after class or go during office hours, that was great. I had the lecture notes or I was a Cliff Notes person. I was a Cliff Notes or Spark Notes, give me the high level, not so much because I didn't pay attention to what was going on. It's, I need to hear things more than once. I will listen to podcast episodes or audiobooks more than once. And I think that you're just simply tapping into a different way of learning for some people. Some people learn great by just watching someone, they can retain everything. And some people like myself, as soon as I found audiobooks and podcasts, I just feel like my ability to retain information just skyrocketed because I'm like, oh, this is what I needed. I needed my ability to be able to move my hands or go on a walk, go on a jog, and be able to retain information. So I think that you're ahead of the curve as far as
hopefully.
Yeah.
But it's you bring up an interesting point because everybody does have their way that they like to learn. but it's also
Mhm.
really good if you can come at it through different channels. So you
Right.
come to, you go attend a lecture, you read something, you listen to something, you do something, and all of these things together kind of make different connections in your brain, and you're going to, you are going to retain things better.
Right.
One of the reasons I decided to do the podcast is when I went back to school to get my doctorate, I was in my mid 30s. So I'd been out of school for a long time and took some really hard classes. Well, I would record my statistics classes,
Mhm.
which just sounds insane. I mean, think about just audio with somebody
Yeah.
at the board going through math problems. But it was a huge help. I'd listen to them when I drove to campus. I had about a half an hour commute, and I'd, because this is how old I am, I'd put a cassette in and, listen to it on the way to campus. And so I know something stuck from those. And so why not give the same opportunity to my students? By the way, I love the Cliff Notes analogy because that's essentially what this podcast is.
Yeah.
It's the audio Cliff Notes. Is what it amounts
Yeah.
to.
Oh, that's
So
great. You gotta use that. You gotta use that in the
yeah,
next one.
I'm
Then
going
I
to
don't
it now.
know, maybe the next generation is like, what are Cliff Notes? What are, like, what does that even mean? I don't even know if those are around still. I know I use them every
Yeah,
time.
it must be around. I'll cite you. I'll put parentheses profit
Yes.
comma
Yeah.
2021 after. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Oh my gosh. Our conversation about Cliff Notes. This is what we need to have a whole podcast on because I
there you
think
go.
that they carried me, they carried me through so much of my education. That's another topic for another day. And yes,
Yeah.
you did hit right the nail on the head earlier. Accounting was the class for me and economics, which is so funny because those were both my 8 a.m. classes that I dreaded
Yeah.
going to. So yeah, things haven't changed that much in,
No,
in
no,
the
they haven't.
education
They haven't.
space. Well, I want to switch gears because I know that people that are listening to this, they love hearing about, the behind the scenes of how a podcast works, how people really come up with the idea for laying out the format of their show. So I'm curious, well, first of all, how long ago did you launch Rational Ignorance? How
We
long did you launch that podcast?
It's been just under 6 months. We launched in
Okay.
mid-April of this year.
Okay. And then how many episodes do you have out right now? Do you know?
15, I think.
15.
Yeah,
So,
it could be off by one or two, but I think it's 15.
well, I want to be the first to congratulate you because they say that 15 is the magic number to get
Yeah,
past to keep going because a lot of people will stop after maybe their first 4 or 5. They're like, this is a lot of work. This is too much information. So, congratulations, you're already
thank
over
you.
the hump. You're way out there. But I'm curious, how do you split the duties between you and your co-host? What does that relationship look like? Because usually there's someone who prefers to do certain tasks over the other. Is that kind of how you and Andrea work together?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. So, uh, we've been friends for a decade, and so we know each other pretty well. She has a much more restrictive schedule than I do. I mean,
Okay.
I work a lot, but outside of teaching, I kind of work when I want to work.
Okay.
And she has other types of responsibilities. So, I do the editing, I do the posting, I do the artwork. Uh, I'll set up. One of us will set up a Google Doc for a run of show, and then we'll both add to it. But where we have a lot of collaboration behind the scenes is we'll spend hours talking about what we want to say on an episode. I mean,
Mm,
down to the point where we've created mind maps to kind of lay out a complicated topic and how are these pieces going to fit together. So it's, the final product is an hour. We're shortening it to about 30 minutes, but it's an hour. But there's probably 10 hours at least of thinking and discussion that goes into that. And so the real value, I think, in the collaboration, well, you can do division of labor, although I'm not sure it always saves time. I mean, sometimes it's easier to do it
right.
yourself than it is to collaborate on it. But I think the real value is the ability to go back and forth and discuss things. And well, wait a second, I'm thinking this, and Angie will say, no, I don't know, I'm thinking that. Or she'll say, well, this philosopher thinks this about it, and I think, well, okay, we'll kind of build off of each other and create something that's, at least I think it's interesting and tries to be true to our rational ignorance name and get to the point a little bit more quickly. But I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is make sure you know who's going to do what when you start. Because
Yeah.
our arrangement is fine because this was the deal going in. But if we had arranged to split all the tasks 50-50 and I end up doing a lot of it, that would be a problem. So, but I think you find a natural way to kind of work these things out, or you stop, one of the two.
Right. Well, and when you're talking about collaboration, are y'all just going back and forth in your Google Doc? Are y'all talking on Zoom calls? Because I feel like that would be the piece that people would want to know, because you're if you're going to spend about an hour or even 30 minutes recording, I would assume a lot of that is like prep work beforehand. But is that phone calls? Like, what does that look like for y'all?
So we meet regularly. So we'll meet 4 times a month.
Okay.
And we'll record twice a month. So,
Okay.
half of the sessions are planning and working through topics and that sort of thing. And then, the other half, we probably split out to kind of okay, let's get it set up right before we start, and then the recording. So we meet for a couple of hours, but there'll be an hour of kind of, chit chat and, okay, now what angle are we going to take? Did we decide what we're going to do about this or that? And so, but you're right, behind the scenes, there's just a lot of prep. There's really a lot of dialogue, whether it's direct or through a Google Doc. It's really easier to do it directly.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you can work on the Google Doc in between times, but you can't beat this face to face or
Yeah.
camera to face or whatever it is that we're doing. So
Yeah. No, I think it's really important to kind of point those things out because, like I said, I don't have firsthand experience with having an ongoing co-host, but it's something that I've been getting asked a lot more about. So anytime I meet someone who has a co-host of their show, I love to know the behind the scenes of how you made these decisions, because I know that there is somebody listening right now that are like, you said you collaborate, and they're like, wait, but how does that work? Are you in a system, or how does, I think that you answered that question. And I love to hear that y'all are batching, because I think that, if you were to do the same thing every single week, then that would be probably very exhausting, especially as in depth as what y'all are doing your research on. I would think, could you imagine, like, did y'all do any of that in the very beginning where you were doing everything week to week?
No, we always had kind of this interleave plan and then record.
Yeah.
Because you're right, I don't think we could have done it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the editing, that's the big caveat. If you want it to sound polished, like, Crystal's podcast does, it is not an automatic thing. You're either going to have to learn a lot, invest a lot, or you're going to have to pay a lot to get things sounding good. And that's beyond the content editing.
Yeah,
The
for
sound is
sure.
one thing, but the content is more important in terms of editing than the sound. But if you're planning, if somebody's interested in a podcast, just plan all this out. Understand that it's, mine was about, I don't know, 4-to-1 ratio.
Mm.
Whatever ended up in the final episode, it was probably 4 times that to get it edited. And, I'm sure somebody that's better could do it in half the time, but it's time consuming.
No, I think it's great that everybody hears that, because what I love to do is concentrate on exactly what you're talking about, is doing so much more planning before you ever get to a recording session. That way it does cut down. Because imagine if y'all were just having conversations. You're like, okay, let's just hit record. And y'all are like, wait, we went off on a tangent. That has nothing to do with what we were talking about. Let's reel it back in, but you're recording the whole time. So now you have like 4 hours and you have to edit it down to 1. It sounds like chaos. And that's where I can see people getting very overwhelmed with editing, but it sounds like y'all have figured out a system that works well for you, for sure.
Yeah. The putting in the upfront work on the planning absolutely is the way to go. The more you can do that, the better it's all going to be, and the better product you end up with.
Absolutely.
I know everybody thinks they're the best conversationalist in the world, and everybody's going to be interested in everything that I've got to say, but that's just not the case for most people. It is for Crystal. There's small, she's one of a small number, but the rest of us, we can't. So you really have to plan it out if you want to have a good product, particularly if it's going to represent you somehow.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
if it's going to be the face of your business, or I'm not in the business of podcasting, but I have a reputation, and
Right.
if there's a crappy sounding, poorly done podcast out there, and I'm the co-host of it, there's going to be some bleed over. So you have to think through these things before you really get started.
Well, and on that note, does Andrea, as your co-host, does she want to hear the final product before you publish it? Or is she just like, you got this, Craig. I just trust whatever you do is going to be fantastic and you put it out there. How does that work?
No, she's much smarter than that. She knows better than to discuss. No, so I try to get it out to her. When I do the first edit, I'll post the MP3 file up to, Google Drive and send her the link, and she'll listen to it because she catches things that I didn't catch.
Oh, okay.
You know how it is. You get your head down in the editing, and it's really easy to miss some little whatever. And so that second set of ears, we said, well, we should probably cut this, or, we went on a long time with this piece, and so maybe we should cut that out. And so it's really great. She's great at that. So
Yeah. And I think that that's the reason why I've seen an increase in people being curious about having a co-host, because you aren't just doing all the things yourself. You have someone to say, oh, this is a really good piece, or, oh, like, what were we even talking about? We went on and on about this one thing for like, our audience isn't going to care about that. But you have these things that other people, it's kind of like that mirror that you need for people to, hold up to you and say, hey, we can do better than this, or this is a fantastic product. But I think it's a really interesting dynamic. And I love learning about it. Cause like I said, I don't have a co-host on a regular basis. So,
well, and let's say you don't want a co-host, you can
Mhm.
find some trusted person that will give you honest advice, that can say, well, this isn't working or that isn't working. And, you might be able to get them to listen to it before you publish. In fact, my wife, Tracy, I said, well, how'd you like the latest episode? And she was kind of, y'all just go on and on and on about some of this stuff, and nobody cares about this or nobody cares about that. And, it was, I have really thick skin, so it didn't bother me much. I appreciated her telling me that, because we, kind of leaned out our episodes a little bit. We would sit down and do the general chit chat. How are things in Sedona? Oh, that's all great. How are things in Louisiana? Well, they're all great. Literally nobody cares. Nobody cares that the tourists are in Sedona, unless they're planning a trip to Sedona, which you should. Sedona is absolutely stunning. But, and she was right. So even if you don't have a co-host, find somebody that will tell you the truth. You don't ask your mom.
Yeah.
Don't ask your mom.
This is just amazing. Everything
Oh,
you do is
yeah.
amazing. Well, and I think it's true too, to like, if you're asking friends and family to listen to it, also take into consideration, is the topic for them? Because that's where, people will say, oh, well, my husband hates this episode, or he doesn't like this. And I say, well, is he part of your ideal audience? Because
Right.
that's something like, if it's a technical, tactical thing that you can change, as far as the sound is awful, or you're getting some weird feedback. I had to turn off my dryer before we started this. My washer and dryer is literally on the other side of, I was like, what is that noise? I hear something. Apparently there's one of those like wool balls like rolling around in there. I was like, okay, we're 100% going to hear that in this episode. So I had to turn it off, but I would need someone to say, hey, you have a weird, noise in the background. But other than that, like, just take it with a grain of salt whenever you do get some of that feedback, because honestly, I listen to podcasts and they talk about nonsense, and it's one of my favorite parts of the episode.
Yeah.
So,
Right. No, everybody's got their own thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, at least
Well,
the dryer is better than the leaf blowers and
oh
lawnmowers, I'm
my
guessing.
gosh. No, that's the worst. That's why I try not. So we're recording on a Wednesday for anybody that's curious. Thursdays is the day. I try not to do any podcast recording. And if I do, I try to get it early in the morning because for whatever reason, they will show up at very random times on a Thursday. And I'm like, guys, please, like we're recording podcasts in here. We're making history. We're doing all the things. Please turn the lawnmowers off.
But that's an important thing for people to consider.
Yeah.
I came to campus today. I usually work at home,
Hmm.
just get more work done that way. But we live literally in the middle of the woods, and the internet is spotty.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, if it's Andrea and me, she knows if my video goes out, it's no big deal. And but I can't do that to Crystal. So I'm going to come to school where you're not going to be able to see my cats, but there's not going to be a cat coming in or a dog barking at me to get a treat or a dryer going or any of that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So we've been lucky. There's a train that runs about 100
Oh,
yards. We haven't had a
it's
train
waiting
yet.
for the finale.
It
It's
is.
waiting
It
for the
is.
finale. It's going to roll in right at the end.
Right. So yeah, it's always something. But you really do have to think about that and explain to your family. I mean, my wife knows when we record. Then don't try to not come up, and she'll try to keep the dogs quiet and that kind of thing. And so it can be a real problem if you don't think
Right.
about that in advance. I mean, you don't have to have a sound studio, but at
Right.
least I have a sticky note that says I'm recording, on the
Yeah.
door. At least have a sticky note, if nothing else.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I think that that's like the next level in podcasting when you start I'm going to send you a door hanger. I have some door
All
hangers
right.
that says I'm recording.
Recording.
So come back later.
All right. That'd be great. Yeah.
I'm going to send you one. You need one of those. Well, Craig, this has been so awesome. And I want to wrap up with our last segment talking about some rapid fire questions. So
Okay.
are you up for those?
I am.
Okay. So the first question is, what piece of advice would you give to a brand new podcaster?
It's my life motto: see your possibilities, not your limitations. There are going to be
Ooh,
a
that's
thousand
good.
things that could get in your way, but if you just start somewhere. I mean, that's kind of your motto, right? Start somewhere, do something, and you'll get better at it. And if you wait until everything's perfect, you're just never going to do it. So see what you can do. Don't get hung up in what's going to get in the way.
That's really, really, really good. I have a feeling that hit somebody real hard just now. They're like, oh,
Yeah,
I needed to hear that today. So thank you for sharing that.
sure.
The next question is a two-part question. So, what is the dream podcast you would love to be on? And who is a dream podcast guest you would love to interview?
So you mean besides your podcast? I mean, this is
Yes.
I've checked off my bucket list now. Um, so I'd really love to be on Jordan Harbinger's show.
Oh,
I mean,
awesome.
he is such a good interviewer, and I don't know, he's just his show is really fantastic and really varied. So he covers all kinds of stuff. That's my podcast when I'm bush hogging. So if I'm mowing one of our pastures, that's what I'm listening to because I don't know what's going to be coming up next, but I know it's going to be interesting. And so that would be, plus he's got a huge audience. So that's always
Right.
a big benefit. Um, and I know you're going to think I stole this from the Pod Sound School folks, but I would
Uh-huh.
love to interview Jack Reesider from Darknet Diaries. Uh,
Okay.
I mean, he created this monster literally out of nothing. I mean, he's got a great story about how, he got started and what he did and how he was able to build an audience and some of the things he did, like a podcast movement to help.
Mm-hmm.
And he's so good at what he does. Even my wife, who has no interest in technology, he does kind of hacker stuff.
Okay.
We were ready to drive around after we were getting home from a road trip so we could hear the end of one of his episodes. I mean, it was that's when it's a really good story. Oh no, we're
Yes.
home, but we're going to drive around we've been on the road for
E
6 hours, but we're going to drive for a while to get to
Oh
the
my
end of this
gosh.
one. So I just think he would be a fantastic interview.
Oh, that's so good. So good. I'm going to link to those in the show notes for anybody that's curious. Okay. And then the last question is, do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
Um, I'm going to hedge on that one a little bit. I would like to consider myself not a perfectionist, but a lot of us are. We want to. The amount of time I spend on trying to get the sound right would say otherwise. But I do recognize that old saying that perfect is the enemy of good. It's never going to be perfect. So I do accept that it's never going to be perfect, but I want to push the envelope on how close I can get.
That's awesome. Craig, this has been so much fun. And again,
Yeah.
I just thinking back to our conversation where we were talking about your podcast and all the fun things that you're doing. So I thank you for coming on the show today, but I want you to tell listeners which podcast that they need to go run to right now to hear all about you and Andrea and your other podcasts. So tell us where we can find them.
So the Rational Ignorance podcast is on rationalignorancepodcast.com, or on Twitter, I'm at the RI podcast. I did not choose well for that handle, but that's what we have. If you're interested, the one for my students is called Information Systems for Business. If you put that in with my last name, VAN space SLYKE, you'll find it. And then we have a new podcast through the university called Cyberways, where if you have an interest in information security, you might want to listen. We interview researchers and kind of take their really academic stuff and put it into a form that security professionals can benefit from. And anybody that wants to email me, I'm rationalignorance@pm.me. That's paulmary.me. And I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, this is so awesome. And I'm going to have to tell my husband, he's in IT and he has a specialty in like
Oh,
cybersecurity and he has people. So you got some listeners. You
all
got some
right. Way to
listeners
go.
for a brand
Good.
new one. I'll have to
All
tell
right.
him.
Great.
But thank you, Craig, so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I really did enjoy it. Can't wait to see a podcast movement next year. It's near you, right? Near Dallas.
It's in Dallas.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks again.
So what did you think? Oh, it was so good. I love Craig sharing his different pieces of his journey, the ups and the downs, and just the real honesty behind making decisions as a podcaster. I think oftentimes people just think that people innately know what to do. And I love hearing the behind the scenes, especially in conversations like today and bringing them to the podcast, because I want you to know as a podcast listener that everybody's journey is different, right? Like you heard Craig talking about him and his co-host, like they would go through sessions together to really understand how a piece of content is going to perform for them or how much detail or depth they wanted to share. And I just love hearing the systems and processes that work for other podcasters because maybe they could work for you. Or maybe you're like, I don't know that I'm going to do it that way, but he had a great idea about something else. This is why I love hearing from so many different podcasters. And at this point, I've spoken to thousands and thousands of podcasters and I've heard different aspects of their journey. And I believe that we can just all learn from one another the more that we share the behind the scenes, which is what we love to do around here. So go check out Craig's podcast. It's going to be linked in the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 306. I want you to go connect with him. I want you to go check out his podcast. And I would love it if you would leave him a rating and a review telling him that you found him from this show and you appreciate all the incredible things that he had to share with us today. So again, that's crystalprofit.com/episode 306. Go check out the Rational Ignorance podcast. And that's all I have for you today. So if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast. And I would love it if you would leave us a rating and a review telling us what you thought about the show or another topic that you want us to cover here on the podcast. But as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.